Romans chapter 12 from 3 to 8 is what we're going to start off with today. For through the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. Verse 4. For just as we have many parts in one body, and all the body parts do not have the same function, all the body parts do not have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually parts of one another. However, since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, each of us is to use them properly. If prophecy, in proportion to one's faith. If the gift of service, in the act of serving. Or the one who teaches, in the act of teaching. Or the one who exhorts, in the work of exhortation. The one who gives, with generosity. The one who is in leadership, with diligence. The one who shows mercy, with cheerfulness. Those verses from 6 to 8, we're going to be going deep dive into these gifts, which I'm calling them the gifts of grace for service, so that we can make a distinction from the gifts of the Spirit, which are also used for ministry. But these are gifts of grace and service. These are the types of gifts that we use on a daily basis. Whether you are in ministry or not, these apply. So when you wake up in the morning and you go to work, if you're not going to church that day and you're going to work that day, you can still do the same thing that God called you to do as if you were going to church that day. You can still be a leader if you got to be a leader. You can still serve if you got to serve. You can still give generously if you are a giver. We're going to break those down over the next couple of weeks, so don't miss them. But I want to give you guys 3 highlighted points today, or 3 big subtitle points today in this new series called Gifted. The first one is, if you're ready for this, write this down. You are gifted by the grace of God. It's all about that grace. There's nothing else. You are gifted by the grace of God. How many of you guys understand that you woke up this morning by the grace of God? Period. Like, you didn't wake up because you got yourself up. Some of us, if it wasn't because of the grace of God, we would not have gotten up. We are here today because of the grace of God. It's all about the grace. And when we talk about the gifts of God, what God has given to his people, it is only about that grace. In Romans chapter 12, verse 6, which we just read, I'm going to repeat it again. It says, however, since we have gifts, turn to the person next to you and say, you got some gifts. Turn them. Now turn to the other person, because that person ignored you because they're trying to pretend like you weren't going to talk to them. Turn to somebody else and say, you got some gifts. Now turn to the person who said nothing and say, would you please be obedient for a moment? All right? You got some gifts. We have gifts that differ according to what? The grace. The what? The grace given to each of us. And each of us is to what? Use them properly. If you have been given something, you have not been given something just to hold on to something. You have been given something to use it properly. You got me. The hairs on my arm are standing up, but I have this in my notes later on, so I'm going to stay on track. I'm not trying to lose you guys too early. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10 says this, as each one has received a special gift. Turn to the person next to you and say, you got a special gift too. Did somebody talk to you, Caleb? No? Did Daddy look at you and he said, okay. Did you look at Daddy and say, you got some special gifts too? Let him know. Let him know. Say, I don't care if you're old, homie. You got some gifts too. Let him know. Come on. He's only old relative because, your daddy's younger than me, so he's not old. As each one has received a special gift, what are we supposed to do with it? Employ it, meaning use it properly in serving one another as good stewards of the multifaceted grace of God. I like that word. That's a good word, multifaceted Grace of God. We're going to break down this simple phrase. I'll read it again. As each one has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the multifaceted grace of God. So what do we need to know here? Again, what is the main title? You are gifted by the grace of God. It's all about that grace. So here's the things we need to understand. You have gifts. It is an undeniable truth that you have gifts. When Scripture says that you have received gifts, what does that mean? You got gifts. When God says you have a special gift, it doesn't mean that God's thinking about giving you some stuff. It means that you have it. Because whatever God says something is, it is. Are you hearing me? There's no, oh, I don't see it, so maybe it's not here. No. God has spoken it, and because God has spoken it, it is. So when God says, by His grace, you got some gifts, guess what you got? Gifts. You might not know what they are. You might not recognize them. You might not know how to use them. But you have them. Are you hearing me? Like, I don't care if you grew up in a household where all they told you was you were good for nothing. That is a lie. You've got gifts and you are worth something, and you got to use those gifts that God has given you. It's an undeniable truth that you have gifts. Are you hearing me? When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I'm about to date myself here. But y'all, all you older folks, you guys are going to help me out, okay? Especially the older men in the house. How many of you guys remember Thundercats? Raise your hand if you remember. Yeah, all my 40 plus, a couple of under 40s know what's up, though. Okay. How many of you guys remember the Thundercats? And does anybody under 40 remember Thundercats? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay, the Thundercats. Man, that was the thing when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And the Thundercats had this car. You guys remember the car? I don't remember the name of it. I should have looked that up because that would probably helped out the example. But they had, what was it? The Thunder Tank. Man. What? This sucker was, it was the toy car. You know, back when kids actually played with toys and didn't just play with phones? Okay? We had toys back in the day. And that's all I wanted for Christmas was Thundercats. The car, it looked like, I can't even tell you how, it was just so cool, man. The Thundercats vehicle, and that's all I wanted for Christmas, right? And so we were living in Jersey at the time, and my father had his studio. He's an artist, and he had a studio in the attic, and I figured, where else they're going to hide my gifts? It must be in the attic. So I started snooping around. Isn't that what good kids do before Christmas? So half the fun is figuring out what you're getting before you get it. Am I just saying, right? So I was snooping around, and I found the Thundercats car in my father's studio. How do you think I felt? And I was like, oh, you know the Thundercats, right? And I was excited, man. I'm like, I'm getting what I wanted. The gift was mine. My father finds out that I found it. My father says, and he's, poker face, like poker face could be. Oh, that's not for you. That's for your cousin Ricky. He said it's so serious, I believed him. How was my spirit after that? You see a 7-year-old, 8-year-old boy's dreams crushed? I was crushed. My dad could have said, hey, don't say nothing, you can't have it until Christmas. Nah, he said, it's for your cousin Ricky. I was like, that fool don't deserve inside. That I love him. I love my cousin. But inside of me as a 7-year, 8-year, I'm like, that fool don't deserve this. I'm your son. What do you mean this gift? The only thing that I wanted for Christmas is for my cousin? That doesn't even make no kind of sense. Why would you hide it in your studio from my cousin Ricky who lives 30 minutes away? But I believed him. And I was disappointed when I found out that gift was not mine. But when Christmas morning came around and I found out that the gift was mine, you already know all things turned around. The switch got flipped, and I was super excited because I knew the gift was mine. I don't know if you're hearing me. We've got to understand that God has given you gifts, and they're yours. Like, you might not know it yet, but they're yours. You might be in a place where you're trying to figure out what gifts has God given you and how do you use them. But you have to know that they're yours. They are there for you. They're not for your cousin Ricky. He got his own gifts. But the gifts that he's got, they are for you. We have them. It's an undeniable truth. Did you know that you have gifts? If you don't know that you have gifts, right, the person next to you, help them know. Let them know, hey, you got gifts. Let them know again, because they apparently don't know yet. All right, you got gifts. Okay? Now, are you functioning in your gifts? That's probably a better question, right? Because the two verses we read, one of them says you have to employ them as good stewards, as good administrators, you got to use them. And then the other one says you have to properly use them, okay, if you've got gifts. To use our gifts means we got to function, right? We got to use them. How many guys understand this truth? Write this down or memorize this. Anything that is not functioning is what? Dysfunctional. If you've got gifts, which we've just established you have them, this is going to hurt for somebody. If you've got gifts, how many guys, you got gifts? Raise your hands. You got gifts? You know this now, right? You've got gifts. If you are not functioning in your gifts, what does that make you? Dysfunctional. Pastor, well, that's not very nice. I don't care. I don't care, because my goal is not for you to remain dysfunctional. My goal is for you to be functional according to the way God designed you to be.